Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about employing strategies to cultivate spiritual sense and let the perfection of being be you. Listen as we explain why it is essential to take a side, because there is no mixing of the false with the true, and as Paul told us in Galatians 6:8, for he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Listen as we explore the statement, the true consciousness is the true health. Mary Baker Eddy Miscellany 298-25. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live as the perfection of the divine principle which all is. Swami, the title of today's show is Sensing the Omnipresent Divine Principle. Can you tell us what that means to you?
Yeah, I think what we want to talk about today is this idea of how to awaken the spirit within. In this model, spiritual awakening isn't a declaration made by a finite mortal being, but the state of conscious awareness of an eternal principle. It just seems that in the spiritual community today, you hear a lot of these, what I would call cliche statements. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Or I'm spiritual, you're not. And this is the stuff that we really want to get some clarification on, because to be spiritual is really to be one, and to be one with the divine creative principle, which means there is no two-ness in anything that you are perceiving. And so it's a process. But initially, we must sense there is a divine idea. There is a divine creative principle that is functioning right here and right now.
Well, you said the phrase eternal principle. Is the principle we're talking about what you were saying about two-ness, that there can't be two? And what makes it eternal?
Yeah, these are good questions to ask. What makes it eternal? Eternal is that it always was and it always will be. Now, spirit is infinite, omnipresent. It's invisible and it's intangible. The main thing that we really focus on here now is the mind that we're using to get us through this lifetime, that perceives what isn't real. We have to somehow overcome, come out of, and we have to awaken a completely different way of perceiving what is before us. This idea of repent, think differently. But what we've learned in Kriya Yoga is there are strategies we can employ in order to effectively make these adjustments, make these changes. So the preparatory work for the realization of oneness becomes essential in order to truly know the truth, which promises this freedom. And here we use the physics of spirituality as the formula. Like attracts like. There's no way to put the beauty of holiness in a finite mortal form. So on a deep level, purification, We can't mix the worldview of a material, finite, mortal existence with the perfection of the divine creative principle. So we must purify individual consciousness of all erroneous concepts, theories, beliefs, and forms in order to create a hospitable environment to invite the beauty of holiness into our awareness.
Well, let's talk about that word purify for a moment. So what does that look like when I do that?
The easiest way for me to really explain this is underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void or the nothing. The easiest way for you to sense the infinite omnipresence of the divine principle is to stop forming thoughts and opinions based on information coming through your corporeal senses and make your mind an avenue of awareness for the presence of what is invisible and intangible to your material senses. To sense the divine, we must go where the divine is. It is right here and right now running a perfect universe beyond the reach of sense-level awareness. The divine principle is before thought and above corporeal sense. In order to invite this invisible, intangible law into consciousness, we replicate it in our inner environment. We find divine truth in silence and stillness, and we perceive it in spiritual sense, not the material sense of the mortal mind.
So, Swami, I see we have a soundbite here from Herb Fitch that might be appropriate to play at this time.
Yeah, this comes from Fourth Dimension, Class 14A. And if anybody is interested in the full audio file or the complete program, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
And finally, the greatest discovery that was ever made by Jesus has not been made by the religions of the world. He discovered God. And how strange that they have never discovered that that's what he did discover. If he was the Son of God, that discovery would have been impossible. It would have been just, there it is. Naturally, I'm God. God is my Father. But he discovered it, rising up out of human sense. Now, when you have accepted your immortality, you cannot also accept your mortality. That's like saying the Spirit of God is an immortal body. And as long as you try to live on both sides, the immortal and the mortal, you'll find you get hurt in both places. You can't split infinitives that well. A woman had just learned that the Spirit of God was her being. She had learned to some extent what she should do to overcome the belief in a personal self. All of this was making a great impression on her. And after she had it, she then said, now about my husband, he's getting older, and we have this great acreage and his responsibilities, and he's not really quite able to do the things he used to, and he's kind of worried about it, and I am, and I'm wondering what I can do to, cope with the situation. And I said, well, you can do one of two things. You can meet the situation humanly, or you can accept spiritual identity for both of you. Now, I said, don't try to do both. Either you are the child of God and he is, or you accept that you're not the child of God. But if you try to be the child and act like a human, you're starting out in an impossible situation. Now, I said, suppose you decide that because he's getting older and all of that, as you see it, that you really do want to do something for him. You say he doesn't have the energy. Now, what can you do? And she thought about it, and she said, there's really nothing I can do, is there? There wasn't anything she could humanly do to give him energy. The only way she could really help that family was to be a witness for Christ within. She had to learn how to wash her feet and his, and while going about it, to wash the feet of the sheep on the ranch. The spiritual way is not an extra something that you do. It's not something you add to your human way. It's a departure. And you don't hold on to what you're departing from. You don't turn back. The embryo that is born isn't still an embryo. And though we come now to a place where we're just Infants, what about it? What's wrong with stumbling as an infant? Haven't we learned that long suffering is part of the way? Of course it's a suffering. How could we possibly walk on spiritual feet in 1 minute? And so we are prepared for what appears to be a struggle. What of it? At least in that struggle, nothing gets hurt. The only thing that gets hurt is your sense of impatience and frustration, but there's no hurt.
Swami, Herb mentions the washing of the feet. I'm hoping that maybe we can spend some time to discuss that.
Yeah, Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, and then Herb gives us a great explanation of that in this same work, and I'll read it. This is the foundation of your physical self, and now I'm trying to change your foundation. I'm trying to make you aware, not of your physical being, because certainly your feet don't need cleaning. I'm making you aware of your invisible spiritual selfhood, and I want you to learn to stand on it. I want you to stand on your inner divinity. Then later on he says, you wash the feet of the world every day with your knowledge of the universal Christ. Therefore, when you do that, when you recognize the universal Christ, you have caught the meaning of washing the feet. Now you cannot turn over here and wash the feet of these 10 and turn over there and condemn. The washing of the feet must be a universal, or you haven't caught it. This is an important thing to understand about being spiritual, is that spirit is one. It can't be divided. There's no such thing as I'm spiritual and you're not. If there's division, it's not spiritual.
Swami, how would we know that we would be standing on our spiritual sense and not on our feet?
Yeah, divine truth in consciousness heals the sick, reforms the sinner, raises the dead. And this is your litmus test. Are you changing the human mental material picture and revealing the divine perfection? Evaluating the inner landscape and separating the wheat from the tares. This is an important part of what we've been talking about, is creating this hospitable inner environment and constantly asking yourself that question, how do I know what I'm calling the one true truth is the one true truth and not the mental counterfeit or the human concept of truth? Because spirit is a demonstrable principle. Spirit testifies with deeds and not words. And a big part of us being able to create this environment that invites divine truth into your consciousness. A big clue that Scripture gives us is love fulfills the law. And so we know if my inner environment does not have divine qualities, if my inner environment is inundated with symptoms of guilt, shame, anger, resentment, blame, emptiness, boredom, I would know these are mortal. But peace, love, joy, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, patience, temperance, these would be the divine qualities. A big part of the practice is keeping your inner environment at that higher level of understanding, because we have divine mind. It only knows divine truth. And when these human thoughts, persons, places, things come into our awareness, we should know by now that they did not come from divine truth. And so we treat them differently. We don't react to them. We know on this new level of consciousness, they are not real.
Swami, help us not fall into this trap. What would be an example of when we are having a human concept of truth? What would we think or what would we believe?
Well, again, I mean, this would be really difficult to do, especially in a show where we don't have an actual example. But the thing that I've been really focusing on is this idea of making the invisible, intangible, spiritual reality my home, my identity, and recognize what I see with my corporeal senses isn't there. And what I don't see is there. So you start with the divine idea. You must start with the principle that life is perfect. And anything that does not have this divine footprint, you know, is no longer real. It's a human thought about it. The next thing is you really start to understand the difference between spiritual and mental. Mental effects can change the human picture to some extent. You can change finite bad to finite good. But if you still are working at that level of duality, you're working with effect, and you're accepting the good and you're rejecting the bad, you're still at the level of duality. You can't separate finite good from finite bad. We must rise. We must come into this network of oneness, which is spirit. Spirit is different than mental effects.
Well, we're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, you had mentioned the phrase invisible and tangible. Could you maybe develop that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, the idea that spirit is invisible and intangible, because matter is visible and tangible. The mental world, the astral plane, is invisible but tangible. But spirit is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. And spirit is a law. It is a principle. It's a rule. Spirit is the dissolving force of the universe. It's translating everything back to itself. Now, even say, for example, in that soundbite we played by Herb Fitch, where the woman decides that there isn't anything she can do to give her husband energy. Now, in this model, we might dispute that. There are a lot of quote-unquote things materially that we might be able to do to increase energy levels. Changing how you're thinking, changing how you're breathing, keeping yourself hydrated, nurturing yourself with food that is more conducive for generating more energy, maybe even introducing exercise. This idea of stress the organism, nurture it, it gets stronger. These are all tried and true methods, but we're not talking about just doing something materially or mentally. As we said in the opening, the true consciousness is the true health. The more you start to see spirit is a reliable source of sustenance, Learning to lean on the divine creation as the source of all real life and accepting spiritual rights as the truth of being. We begin to do this by declaring independence from the collective worldly view of life in matter as real, and taking a stand on the incorporeal divine principle. Life is eternal and perfect. And then making the choice. Am I finite and mortal, or am I immortal spirit? And like Herb said, you can't be both.
Well, I see that we have another soundbite from Herb Fitch that maybe we could play at this time.
This is from Fourth Dimension, Class 14A, and if anybody is looking for the whole audio file or the complete program, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
In this new struggle as an infant in spirit, you are learning to do something that is breathtaking. You are learning how to let God be your life. You are learning it's possible to let God be your life. You're not reading about a resurrection in the Bible. You're not going to a ceremonial and watching somebody wash somebody's feet and going home and saying, gee, that was inspiring. You are the resurrection. You are going through the experience of resurrection from infancy and ultimately to full maturity in spirit. And the Jesus Christ way is totally different than even we know as we proceed along our spiritual sense of the way. Because suddenly we come face to face with a new level. I have meat. I can give you living waters. And you look and you see you're a disciple and there he has no meat whatsoever. What's he talking about? Or you're at the well and you look and here's this man. He's dusty with the road. What kind of living waters can he give me? I've got the well, not him. And there he is without meat to see for anyone, without wine to see for anyone, without bread to see for anyone. And he says, I can give you anything you want. But he has nothing. And that's the beautiful thing that Joel has pointed out. He has nothing, but he can give everything. Why? Where is it? In his nothingness, in his elimination of personal sense, in the crucifixion of the man, in the removal of all humanhood, of all mortality, there stands the infinite immortal self, which has all. And the man with nothing who knows I of mine own self am nothing, who has crucified mortality, finds himself to be the infinite invisible, expressing its fullness. And this that little boy knew. In his 20s, he knew this was his way. Resurrection, out of mortality, out of limitation, out of a brief lifespan, out of all the lacks, the needs, the wishes, the hopes, the ambitions, into the acceptance of being, not God, to be discovered somewhere. This is the story of identity. Not God indwelling me, not the Spirit of God inside me, not seeking the presence of God, but recognizing your being is the presence of God. Your being is that presence. And then you're in one. Then you're in union. Then you are casting no shadow. And then you are ready to see that every word, thought, and deed in the life of Jesus Christ was to bring you to the place where you and the Father are one and the same. That the presence of God is your being.
Swami, I've heard you say before, we can't have a resurrection without the crucifixion. What does that mean for us?
Yeah, we break this whole thing down into phases in development. The concept of the hero's journey. You've got the separation, the journey, and the return. In our understanding of the Christian myth, you've got the crucifixion of the body, the resurrection of the Son, and the reunion with the Father. So there are three phases in the developmental process we focus on. And like Herb said in this soundbite, there's no going back. It's the idea of the caterpillar goes into a chrysalis and then becomes a butterfly. Now, it can never go back and be a caterpillar again. This transformation has changed the outer picture. The same is true with the human as we develop from physical identity to this astral mental awareness to spiritual identity, there's really no going back. Who would want to?
Well, what is the function of the Christ in making these right choices?
Yeah, Christ is the Messiah and the universal principle which makes the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. Without the Christ, we're guessing or believing, hoping, but there really isn't any knowing. So we sit in silence and stillness and we wait, watch, listen, and let the light of divine truth dawn on consciousness, this birth of the Christ within, waiting to see life is solely in and of the divine spirit and the only reality of existence. Everything else is false. However, we must be educated out of the false sense of identity along with the false sense of health or illusion of health. And as Johann von Goethe said, none are more hopelessly enslaved as those who falsely believe they are free. It reminds me of the story of a farmer who found an eagle chick on the ground at the edge of his field and brought it back to the farm, then raised it with the chickens. And the eagle walked around the yard picking corn with the rest of the chickens, thinking it was a chicken, never realizing itself to be an eagle. Humanity walks blindly in a similar hypnotic state, unconscious of true identity. We are eternal spiritual beings.
So I'd like to revisit the idea of purification and why that is so important for us to embrace that part of our development.
Yeah, purifying the mind-body complex in order to develop sensitivity for the invisible, intangible divine omnipresence. Purification serves as a loosening of consciousness from the grip of mortal sense, identity imprisoned by a belief in two powers, the never-ending struggle between good and evil, by accepting the good and rejecting the bad. We do this by accepting the one, only one being, one perfect spiritual life, by stopping the thinking with the corporeal senses and rising into the network of oneness without opposite. True consciousness, not the divided consciousness which sees what isn't there and is blind to what is there. And one of the things that we have here is from miscellaneous writing, Mary Baker Eddy, and she kind of tells us how to do this, and I'll read it. There is not sufficient spiritual power in the human thought to heal the sick or the sinful. Through the divine energies alone, one must either get out of himself and into God so far that his consciousness is the reflection of the divine, or he must, through argument and the human consciousness of both evil and good, overcome evil. End of quote. So here we're learning that there are things we can do in order to induce this God experience.
It is that time to break down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the fading banner Blog Talk Radio, click it, directs you to its catalog page. Click the products tab, then online classes, directs you to all the classes that Swami has available for you. Any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live as the perfection of the divine principle, which all is. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.